Today we're going to take a closer look at DC20 and we're going to fix it. What'd you say?
You're not a member of the clan, you don't have the right. I have every right.
You might be thinking to yourself, what right do I have to go and try to fix DC20? I don't know. What kind of YouTube content creator would go take an RPG system and try to fix it? If you haven't had a chance, please take a look at my video where I looked at DC20 without all the hype and just really try to make a comparison between DC20, D&D 5e, and inadvertently had it compared to D&D 4th edition and Pathfinder. The one thing I wanted to point out is that I was clearly trying to show that I really believe that DC20 is a really good system, but it's definitely tailored towards more advanced players. Not that you need to be a genius to play, just that there's going to be a lot more moving parts. And I was also trying to point out that I think some of the limitations that DC20 has, it's because it's too tied to D&D and Pathfinder. So let's see if we can get DC20 to break those shackles. Now, as you guys know, every team out there has a head coach. And that head coach often has a assistant head coach. But it doesn't stop there, right? Every single team has a large group of coaches to help guide the team and provide their own expertise and their own opinions about the game. So today, we're going to look at the Dungeon Coaches DC20. We're going to be the assistant coaches. And I myself am going to put on my assistant coach hat. And we're going to look at DC20 and fix some of the things that I think will make the game much, much better. Now, the first thing I want to do is just go over some of the attributes. Now, I think the attributes are fine. 4 attributes, as I said previously, is fine. They simplified it. The only notes I have is perhaps one day somebody's going to try to even simplify it further, and they're going to essentially get rid of charisma. We also looked at the standard array. And if you guys recall, I kind of made a little bit of a gripe about these negatives in DC20 as well as Dungeons and Dragons. I just don't understand why they're there. Now, I made an entire video about this where I really just wanted to show how the commoner has no negatives and there's no reason why your hero should have negatives. Now, if you're thinking, am I out of my mind and I don't know what I'm talking about? I have somebody to back me up. That's right. D&D 4th edition had a standard array that you can see does not go below a 10, and their ability modifiers are exactly the same as 5e. So there was no negative modifiers for heroes in D&D 4th edition. What I'm putting down for my assistant dungeon coach notes is I don't think there should be an attribute limit, which is currently in DC20. That doesn't make any sense to me. I get they're trying to balance the game. If somebody wants to be really good at one thing and suck at everything else, that's on them. Let them play their character the way they want to play that character. So as for the standard array, I put down nothing but zeros. You can add 3 or 4 points to any of the attributes in the way you want to. No restrictions. Now, the other thing that came up was the prime modifier. And I didn't really make a big deal about it except for how it plays a role in awareness. But let's not think about that real quick. What I really want to do is just kind of think about how D&D approaches its attacks. If you're a melee attacker or ranged attacker and you're some type of martial, you're going to use strength and dexterity. Now, monks have that ability that they can use dexterity instead of strength for their melee. But when you look at these magic users, they use wisdom, charisma, and intelligence. And the Hexblade Warlock is known for being able to use charisma as part of its melee attack when it's using its packed weapon. And as you guys probably know, Constitution gets no love in Dungeons and Dragons. So I really think that the prime modifier, in terms of when it's used for attacking and stuff like that, is actually very comparable to Dungeons and Dragons because you can always apply those highest bonuses to the different types of attributes that are necessary for that class. Now, the only suggestion I really had for the prime modifier is maybe perhaps having 2 types of prime modifiers. I know it seems complicated, but if you're going to multi-class, you already like complexity. So if you're a martial and you want to get into some spell casting, you should have to use another attribute for your prime modifier for that spell casting ability. And if you're a spellcaster trying to get into martial, you should have to pick a different attribute as well. Now, I just talked to you about the prime modifier being used for awareness/perception. My fixed number one is already kind of part of what's going on in DC20. You just give mastery to whichever classes you think should have an awareness higher than anybody else. And there should be no limit. The other fix I have, putting awareness back into one of the attributes and then ignoring the prom modifier for it. The other thing I want to talk about is damages. We compared DC20 with D&D. Again, we want to focus on DC20. At the time, I did not know how much damage a fist from anybody would do. Turns out it does 1 damage, a monk does 2 damage. But I still think that damage is too low for all these weapons. A dagger essentially does the same damage as this. This is not, well, I guess it could be an instrument of death, but there's no way I think this can beat a dagger, right?
Knife. That's a knife.
So I think the best thing to do for these damages is to just increase all the weapon damages by 1 or 2 points. I recently saw a video by the dungeon coach where he's actually lowering the damages for these weapons. I think this is the wrong direction to go. Again, these are my assistant dungeon coach notes. He doesn't have to listen to me, but I think these are pretty good ideas.
Help me help you.
Now, the other thing I wanted to point out was this tiered success. If I didn't make it clear the first time, I think this tiered success is the money, is the fire in DC20. It's one of the things that really makes the system pop and really makes those attacks matter more as you roll higher and higher. So basically, if you beat any DC by 5, you end up having more damage, more damage, more damage, more damage. The next thing I want to do is I want to look at armor. And I think the main thing I wanted to point out in terms of armor in DC20, I don't think armor should have a PD component. I just think that if you have armor, it's either depending on the quality or the modifications you have on that armor, it could increase your PD, your physical defense, or decrease your physical defense. And I also think we should just stick with this damage reduction using armor. Let's just skip the PD and stick with damage reduction. A shield or light armor could give you 1 physical damage reduction, medium 2, heavy 3. And you may even want to consider increasing those maybe by even 1 point, considering the increase in the damage that I just suggested in the previous slides. Now, if you recall, at the time, I wasn't sure if you only needed a 20-sided dice to play the game, and it turns out, no, you actually don't. You also can need a D4, a D6, or D8, and that's going to be part of what's going to give you your buffs or ability bonuses when somebody's trying to buff your character. But I really think we should get rid of this. The entire system already has a bunch of static numbers that you can use. So why not just do it with the dice? Let's create, instead of having those D4, D6, and D8, let's just give a +2, +4, and +6 and leave it at that. And I mentioned physical defense and mystical defense. Now, I completely understand physical defense. If it has an agility component, it really is your character's ability to bob and weave during combat. That's making you a much more difficult target. And when you think about mystical defense, it's a little confusing because it has something to do with intelligence and charisma, but at the same time, there's something mystical there. But the bottom line, use mystical defense essentially as your willpower to resist those effects. As you guys can see, the hit points in DC20 are pretty low. We're looking at 6 plus level plus might. Okay, that's pretty low. And I just told you to increase those weapon damages. Now, I think this is a simple fix. Just boost that base health point to 10 or 12, and that should be sufficient. It's just a little bit more math, but not really. The entire system is pretty low math as it is. The final thing I want to talk about might be the most controversial thing. As I mentioned in my previous video, that action economy in DC20 and Pathfinder really is not that much different than Dungeons and Dragons if you just apply some points to those different types of things you can do on your turn in D&D 5e. I think DC20 has a big opportunity here to really do something different and really exciting. First, let's get rid of this penalty to attack again, especially with the stacking disadvantage. This makes absolutely no sense to me. Let's just get rid of that. Let's not call them action points anymore. Let's just say you have 4 actions. And because the reactions are superior in DC20, you're not going to hold onto 4 attacks when it's your turn. I mean, it's possible, but it's likely that things are going to come up before your turn that's going to cause you to use your reactions, and you're not really going to have to worry about having a player who does 4 attacks. I think it's going to balance itself out. And when we're thinking about those reactions, we just need to create more reactions. If you recently saw a video, the dungeon coach has decided to take some of those weapon techniques and turn them into more maneuvers, which essentially tells us that there's a plethora of maneuvers that we can choose from.
Would you say I have a plethora?
So remember, the marshals have stamina points, but there's also these grip points. They're kind of like inspiration points where someone actually boosts you up. Essentially, you can get pumped, you can get aggroed, you can have that adrenaline rush, and that's what those extra points are for. So let's just call them temporary stamina points, those that you can use during combat and essentially will disappear after combat. Now, we also mentioned that there's marshals have stamina points and spellcasters have mana points, right? And there's even a way that you can exchange action points for mana points and mana points for stamina. So the points are sort of interchangeable. They're not exactly one for one sometimes, but I think this makes the system a little more complicated than it has to be. Now, what we're looking at here are all the spell casting classes. If you just pay attention to the mana points, the cantrips knowns, and the spell known, and look at level 10 down here, it's 30, 610. Look at a cleric, 30, 610. Look at a bard, look at a druid, look at a sorcerer, look at a warlock. These numbers repeat 30, 5 or 6, or 9 or 10. Okay? Now let's look at those martial classes. If you focus on stamina points, maneuvers known, and techniques known, and look at level 10, we have a 695. 695, you're getting the point here, right? Look at the other martial type classes, 695. Stamina points are 6, maneuvers known 9, techniques known 5. So let's just compare martials versus spellcasters, and we kind of start to see a trend, right? If you look at the marshals, they have 9 points for the maneuvers known. That's similar to spells known for spellcasters. If we look at those techniques, it's 5 known for the marshals, and it's the same amount known for the cantrips. However, there's a discrepancy here. You get 30 mana points as a spellcaster at level 10, but as a marshal, you max out at 6 stamina points. Why? Let's fix that. Let's make marshals have up to 30 stamina points. Okay, so now we're looking at a fighter class table here. Let's fix those stamina points and give you up to 30 by 10th level. Make those abilities that a fighter has cost more stamina points, right? So here's examples of Action Surge actually costing 3 stamina points, and Second Wind also costing 3 stamina points. Now, if you look at level 1, that means you could only cast Action Surge or Second Wind. If you're level 2, you can cast one of each. The other thing I wanted to do is show you that you can take those stamina points and now use those stamina points to gain advantage on an attack. You can also use those stamina points to have +1 more to damage. Think about it. I think that makes more sense. You exert yourself to have a better attack. You exert yourself to do a much harder strike against an opponent. And what I'm talking about is not straight out of left field, right? It's very similar to what we see in spells. Here's Burning Flames. We know how many mana points it's going to cost, but you can spend additional mana points to really increase the effect of that Burning Flames. And this should be similar for the melee attacks. I think one of the things that Dungeons and Dragons is missing, which they're actually trying to do for their 2024 release of Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm not sure if they actually copied DC20. So if you ever feel like criticizing DC20, it looks like, as far as I can tell, D&D 2024 is copying maneuvers from DC20. What I'm telling you is already built into DC20. We know it's in the spells, but guess what? It's also in the techniques. Now you can imagine when you make an attack, all you do is add stamina points and you're able to do a lot more heroic things and even push it to a superhero style of attack. So, Dungeon Coach, if you're out there, I hope you see this. These are good potential homebrews that you can use for your game, really balancing it out, really using that 4 action economy to its fullest. you already have the competitive edge with that tiered success of damage and having reactions galore and really start utilizing those stamina points the way we utilize mana points for spellcasters. Okay, everybody, I hope those boons were useful for you. I'm Don Franco 3. This is RPG Boons, where we talk about everything RPG and how everything is RP. If you like the cut of my gibberish, please hit the subscribe button, leave a comment. I'll get back to you. In the meantime, Dungeon Coach, if you get this and you pick me, I'll work 110% for you.
Man, you just gotta play one game at a time. Go out there, give 110%.